Hi, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, whenever you happenstance in this Truth Bomb riff. My name is Patrick Lovell, and I am doing a little bit of an experiment here. And I am excited to talk to somebody that I've discovered on Blue Sky who's been and I'm very grateful, engaged with a lot of the information that I'm getting out there and been incredibly, I'd say, on it in terms of getting a lot of these ongoing messages to a lot of different people out there. And he's exactly what I regard as a vector of truth because of the information that I have. But I wanted to engage with him and find out who he is and what's important to him and why he's engaged with the Clean New Deal. But for starters, I just want to say hello. And I'm not going to mention your name because I know that you don't want to put your face up and we can see there's a picture, but that's not important in so much as it is our interaction. And what I'd like to just start with, if it's okay with you, is what is on your mind today as we're recording on September 12th, Friday, September 12th at approximately 1:40 p.m. Pacific time. And I am curious, what makes you tick? What are the important things that you pay attention to? And if you don't mind, without your name and where you live, kind of a little bit of an overview of who you are.
Thank you, Patrick. First of all, I want to thank you for inviting me on to your podcast. It's actually an honor, especially the people you're associated with. When I saw you with Lev Parnas the other day, I just went, "Wow, this guy's in there." And I've watched the con and everything like that. Now, to answer your question, uh, yesterday being 9/11, this is what really got me interested when I found you and started researching what you've done. Uh, Yesterday, I was in a community meeting at a senior center, and we went around the room and was asking, well, what do you remember about 9/11 and stuff like that? And when it got to me, I had to predicate it. I had to say, what I'm about to say not you may not like. And essentially it was this. What was my feeling as that happened? Um, of course, initial shock that morning and everything. But as the day progressed and actually as the week progressed, I began to ponder, what has the United States done in the world to piss off the world to make people fly planes into buildings? I've been in recovery for 34 years. And there's a step in the 12 steps. Step 4 made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And indeed, by myself doing that has allowed me serenity and to move forward and stay sober. But man, the US is still fucked up. So, what you talk about, I've always had that feeling about corporations and the people who are in control of the world financially. I'm just a working stiff. I don't have a college education. I've worked hard all my life, recently retired. And, you know, I, I, I'm just drenched in reality. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Well, it does, and it's even more provocative with that final kind of statement, which is icing on the cake, but drenched in reality. Wow. And I a lot of the times try to connect with what I perceive and what I've experienced as reality, right? Particularly in light of, I think, another provocative question you asked with regards to, what do we do around the world to piss off people that they'd be, you know, compelled to commit suicide, and we could have a really long conversation about what that all immures the picture that paints. But from where I'm coming from, particularly as it relates to 9/11, which is extremely important to me. Um, I've picked up information over the course of the last 24 years that, to your question, okay, who's in control and why? And how do they do it? And what are they doing it? And how does that impact me? Which then leads to me being drenched in reality, for example, right? And so I've gone 1,000 miles down that pathway, particularly in my work and of the con, but as it relates to the Clean New Deal as well. And both of them are, quite frankly, very relevant to all things the question you just pondered. But the answers that I've proffered are all over my YouTube channel. I think I'm up to 652, truth bombs on this channel. So I've got me talking at length about what it is that I'm trying to compel and convey. But this is the first time I've talked to you. And I think that's really the magnitude of what I'm trying to get to, because what is exactly, if you don't mind, and the kind of the contextualization of all of these crazy things, and you might even want to put your finger, in the air, or dip your toe in the water as it relates to the assassination of Charlie Cook in my backyard, as you explore this. But what is being entrenched in reality mean to you?
Wow. I'm still trying to square the whole Charlie Kirk thing. So I'll take the first part of your question first, and then I'll get into the Charlie Kirk stuff. Um, I just, it's kind of hard for me to articulate um, being drenched in reality. I mean, I live in an urban area. Okay. I see homeless people. I walk by them all day. Right. And I don't have all the answers. Uh, I just see what I see. Again, I'm going to refer to my recovery because that's really where I grew into an adult. I got sober at 30. Okay. And I've been sober almost 34 years. And basically, in taking my own inventory, I could see where I've done wrong. But I guess essentially what I'm saying is that I've grown up. Now, the whole thing in recovery, they talk about finding a God and stuff like that. Well, I was an atheist when I walked in, and I'm an atheist still today. I've never bought into dogmas and stuff. As a matter of fact, talking to you, I had to think about, because I don't want to be led down the path of some quote unquote, leader, messiah. And one thing, Patrick, and by the way, you can call me Troy. That's my name. I just don't want to get my face out there right now. I may do it in the future. We'll see. But, but uh, the the one thing that I've been telling my friends about with you, you have no sponsors. You don't ask for money. And this is important to me. And it shows that there's some genuine uh, work going on here. Now, I'd like to ask you the question. When you produce the con, in watching that docuseries, I understand you lost your home in the housing crisis and all that stuff. Where did you get the money, man? I mean, did you bring that up yourself? You know, uh, it would be kind of nice to know that.
Sure. So, and I've said this throughout, and I've been very transparent about who I am as a professional. I'm a producer. That's what I do. I've been doing TV and film and productions for 30 years, and I've done it at the highest levels. I came out of early in my career. I worked for Warner Brothers and Paramount, for some of the biggest producers in the business. And then I relocated to Park City, Utah, where I got deeply involved with the Sundance Film Festival. And I've always been involved with action sports productions. So I've worked with some of the best skiers and snowboarders and athletes in the world. And I've done a ton of entertainment and music. And I've been doing this sort of thing forever in terms of commercial production as well. Now, by the time we got to 2008, prior, like the previous 4 years, I was working for an independent production company where I was giving away houses on national, a nationally syndicated television show where our show was like on NBC, ABC. It was all over the place because it was sold, and they might show it on a Saturday afternoon or maybe on a Sunday evening or whatever, depending on who picked it up. But it was a pretty big time show with a big time production, and we were interestingly enough giving away houses to people who had fallen on hard times. And there was a way that the whole thing worked. It wasn't just we gave them a house. We gave them, as we would discover, my colleague and I, Eric Vaughn, and again, this is all over stuff that we've done on our my truth bombs and other discussions that we've had as it relates to the con. But we were working together, and because Eric was my partner on creating the con, but we had discovered that we weren't giving houses outright. We were getting them into a situation where they were taking a subprime loan that they'd agreed to, that where they got a year of free mortgage. They got like $20,000 in upgrades. They had, I don't know, it was like probably $50,000 in value roughly for each recipient of these houses, which was significant. But we didn't give them the house. They got into a loan. So we didn't know that until many years downstream. And nor did we understand what that meant until after we got into it. Now, because I'm a producer, and let me just ask you this question. What do you know about producers? Do you know what producers do?
Well, I happen to be a producer.
Okay,
I
well,
don't know. Well, I'll send you a couple of links. I ran a karaoke show in the South Lake Tahoe area for over 10 years. And before that, where you get the moniker of Radio Attitude is I did a live radio show in a community radio station in Paonia, Colorado, back in the mid 90s. It was short. It was just for a summer. But the karaoke production company was pretty involved because it was one of those. I wanted it to be a kick-ass show, and I know time is limited. I don't want to go into so much about it, but the thing is that I was the money guy. I came up with the idea of uh, how to present it, and that sort of thing, and also did a lot of video of some things where I'll send you the links to where you could view these if you have the time.
sure.
But I've recently have signed up with the local cable access TV station here in my community. Um, so I know what a producer does. Uh, so I understand that. So you've answered my question about your background enough, because a lot of this, what's going to happen is I'm going to be showing my friends this.
Oh,
I
cool.
want all the people I know because I've been talking about it via email with them, sending links and everything. And
Awesome.
well, the thing is the responses I've been getting, um, I've been spamming their email
Okay.
in a way. And because I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Twitter, I'm just on Blue Sky. I used to be on Facebook where I connected with all these people, so I would have been posting your stuff,
Okay.
right? But I'm not going to go on Facebook ever again. I'm
Yeah, I
not
don't
going to
do
go.
Facebook really anymore. Also, that's another story, but interesting.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, with that being said, I want to get into your second part of your question about Charlie Kirk, since we're only,
Okay,
we have
let me
limited
just
time.
finish. Let me just
Yeah.
finish this
Finish
real
what,
quick,
what
though.
you're doing. Go ahead.
So basically, as a producer, you find and you marry investors or some sort of vehicle, whether it's a studio or whether it's a television station or whatever your medium is. You marry a product typically with you know the outlay, and the production comes from a budget. None of this stuff happens for free. So you ask me, how did I make money? Because that's extremely important to what this is all about, and I'll tell you why. I never walked into this whole thing doing this for free. There was no way in hell that we could do what we did for free. That cost millions of dollars. Okay, just so you know. And the credibility that came with it was that I spent literally tens of thousands of hours doing research. I interacted with because of what I do as a producer, and I've been doing it for decades. Okay, and I know how to put things together. But I was also in college, for example, I studied journalism. So I studied political science and I minored in journalism. And I've always been about how things work. Now, when I rotated into Hollywood, I was a small fish in a big pond, but I was a part of like the mega structure and I got a front row seat to how things work. That was the early part of my career. And it just developed and developed until a point where I could go independent and do it myself. Now, I was always an entrepreneur. I was always a guy that would go get projects, you make projects, you have ROI for the investor, and then you move on and you do that. And hopefully you grow and you grow and grow until your point you're successful. That's really the idea because I've always had a love for everything I just told you. Entertainment, music, film, action sports, all of it. It's just what I do. It's just been, the thing that I've really enjoyed. But in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, my life got destroyed, like tens of millions of people. And so there was about a 3 year gap, maybe it was 3.5 years, where I was going through the 2008 great financial crisis as somebody who lost my home and started to ask questions because of all of the stuff that I went through that actually took years. And as a result of that, I started thinking what I'm seeing in mainstream media isn't aligning with what my experience is. And so I started thinking, okay, I got to put together something that answers these questions that I'm being riddled by. And one thing leads to another. And because I'm a producer and I know how to put deals together, and I was on the verge of really the biggest deal of my life when the 2008 great financial crisis hit, where I would have been next level. I would have been one of those guys doing multiple millions of dollar projects kind of thing. And the next thing I know, the whole world came to a screeching end, and I had my family on my back. And I had huge bills at the time, by the way. And one thing leads to another. And I'm like, okay, this isn't adding up. And by the way, my wife and I at that time period, I went from making six figures as a producer on that television show that I was telling you about to making nothing overnight. And I had huge bills. And so my wife and I went to work with two jobs apiece, maybe more on occasion, picking up stuff, working. I mean, because there wasn't any real money happening. Money just disappeared from our country. You either had money or you fell flat on your face. And I fell flat on my face because the 2008 great financial crisis was the worst depression in the United States. And it was a depression for everybody below the line. But it was interesting to me that everybody that seemed to be above a certain threshold started doing very well very quickly. And that was part of the questions I started asking. And so one thing led to another. I reached out to somebody in my community who I knew came from incredible means, whose family had been in the Hollywood community, and we knew a lot of the same people. And I went to him with the presentation, and I literally had $57 in my bank account. I didn't know what was going to happen next. And I said, look, we got to figure out what the hell's going on here because the opportunities that led to your great family fortune have just disappeared. And I want to find out what's going on. And he said to me, if you can figure out how we went of, by, and for the people to of, by, and for the corruption, I'm in. And that was the beginning. And that led to a 16-year odyssey that I'm still in the midst of, where I went to the ends of the earth and back to get the clarity of the largest criminal racketeering enterprise in the history of the world that never ended, that we're right in the middle of, that is the entirety of what this Trump administration is the pronouncement of. Everything that I've been into is everything Trump and this whole billionaire apparatus that made Trump possible reality. And so that's
It's,
that. Go ahead.
I was going to say, like in the music I like, it hits me in the gut and I just know it's real music. What you're doing hits me in the gut. I may not understand it all, but it just seems that it's right.
Thank you.
And yeah, no, thank you. You're remarkable just from what you told me, the amount of work you put in. Myself, I'm kind of lazy, you know, and one thing I want to mention about 2008, in 2010, I moved to Maui, and I ended up living in a place on the west side, and the person who owned the house got into one of those mortgages. It was actually, what do you call it? Adjustable rate mortgage. And by 2012, she had to she had to short sell it because she was going bankrupt. And that was all a result of the housing crisis. So even the working guy like me, I had to pack up and leave the island. I mean, because I couldn't afford to live there, right? Because I had a pretty good deal with what's going on there. But God, I had a view of Lanai and Molokai from my bedroom.
Well,
Even yeah,
let me react to that real quick because
sure.
no matter where you were on the globe, particularly in the United States, but the globe got impacted too. And it wasn't just the housing industry. The housing industry is what affected the rest of the world. Now that's all of the work that's in everything that constitutes what you see behind me. The con that people can explore that we provided for free after we spent millions upon millions of dollars getting this information. And to put it into context in terms of work, by the way, yes, it took me tens of, well, I've never really known exactly, but I know I'm way, way, way north of tens of thousands of hours. Let's put it that way. And we effectually did the work that the United States government couldn't do because of corruption. And to put that into perspective, the sum total of the Department of Justice, the FBI, the SEC, and so on and so forth, they have a collective budget of $90 billion a year that we were able to do for obviously not even a mark on that, right? So when you put that into perspective, you get the understanding that it was a miracle to get the information we did.
Well, I hope I could do whatever I can to forward that. I mentioned to you uh, on the phone the other day, or maybe it was a chat. I don't remember. But I've I want to get the con put on this local cable access. And thank you for agreeing or giving us permission to do that. And I'll talk to you privately about that coming down the line. But that's kind of what I can do and want to do for you or for this country. I mean, you're just like part of well, you're actually the only solution that I'm finding that makes sense. Reason being is the oligarchs, the world finance. We all know Trump is just a product of that, and segueing into the Charlie Kirk thing, trying to square what just happened in 2 days. I mean, I abhor violence. I always talk about, nonviolent protests. We have No Kings 2 coming up October 18th. I'm involved in that. Um, but at the same time, it's like talking to a friend yesterday about Charlie Kirk. He's on the same agreement as I am as far as nonviolence, absolutely. But he did say this: I'm glad we don't need to hear him speak anymore, you know, because of the vitriol and the bigotry and all that stuff. So when I say it's kind of hard to square it, um, I don't want to see people murdered. And if I would have known anybody who murdered somebody, I would turn them in no matter what. It could be my brother, it could be you. You know what I mean? So it's just kind of a digestive thing. One thing that Steve Schmidt said that day was talking about how we during this pause we need to come back together. We need to really have both ideologies work together to stop this violence. And we've heard that before. And as a matter of fact, today I was listening to the BBC or watching the BBC broadcast, trying to stay away from CNN and MSNBC and all those other guys. Because if you look outside of the country at how Europe is viewing this, it's helping me square it. And they were talking to somebody with the Boston Globe, I think, I forget his name, but he was saying that he's hearing from his sources that both sides right now in Congress and stuff uh, are putting together or agreeing with this Boston Globe guy has been saying for, you know, probably for the last several years about this divide is that the Republicans or the people on the right need to speak to the people on the right about toning down violence and rhetoric. The people on the left need to do the same to their base. In other words, they need to talk to their base and say, look, you can't be going out there shooting people. You can't be doing violent acts. You can't be storming the Capitol, right? And to do it in a joint effort and do it every day, make a statement, come out to the microphones and say, look, we can't be doing this. We're going to lose our country. Sure, President Trump wants to, deport illegal aliens. We agree with that if you're on the right. However, you can't be going out there being violent on these people. Again, I'm glad that I listened to the BBC and Al Jazeera um, and try to stay away from MSNBC. I do like Lawrence and I do like Rachel, but like you said the other day, they're paid to kind of omit things, and it's like, yeah, But that's my take on Charlie Kirk. It's unfortunate. His family was there. God, that must have been horrifying. Um, I don't know. Unfortunately, well, I don't want to say unfortunately or fortunately, but since I'm drenched in reality, um, I have viewed four different angles of the hit and saw in graphic detail what happened to the man, and it makes my stomach turn. I'm not like looking at it, for entertainment, but I need to be drenched in reality and feel that pain.
Well, that is a really powerful sort of perspective. But I will ask you this based on what you just gave me then. So, do you have a sense of outside of publicly saying that, yeah, we can do better sort of thing, right? But in context of what it is that I'm revealing, right? Who benefits, in your opinion, from chaos?
I I I want to say no one. Um, but yeah, the tyrant, the Hitler, if you would, I would say.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, look, that I wasn't leading with that question. I just wanted to see what you responded to because the fact of the matter is, yes, we have a tyrant. Okay, we have an idiot who's a tyrant. I'll ask you another question. Do you think it's possible that a guy with the character, the record, the history of who he is to elevate to the presidency on his own?
No, and that's no, I get it. I see where you're going. It's not a leading question, but you're absolutely right. The money that's in politics is what is driving it all. And yes, when I watched the con, I mean, I wasn't really too involved in knowing the part about Eric Holder and stuff like that. It's not that it was new, but it was the insight that you gave was was awesome. Um, I've actually had Jamie Dimon walk by me. Okay. Yeah, I worked in the hotel industry after I left the karaoke thing. Um, in the last in the teens, a major hotel. And I've had Chuck Schumer walk by me, um, and all these, I've I've had Bernie Sanders walk by me. I've sat down with a drink with his wife after Trump was elected and told her that the only reason I voted for Hillary is because your husband told me to. I'm a big Bernie guy, right? And I was involved in the hotel union, and that's where I really started to get the fire burning in the belly. And I bring that up because with Bernie and everything, talking about money in politics, we got to get it out. And really, what got the belly burning for me is I was involved in a union dispute with our company when we had uh, uh, a conference of mayors come to the hotel, and I met Andrew Young. And for those who don't know, Andrew Young was pretty much Martin Luther King Jr.'s right hand man, and was there at the Lorraine Motel on April 4th, 1968, and witnessed his assassination. So full circle with even with the Charlie Kirk. But what came to mind for me at that moment in the teens um, was if this guy could put his life on the line to fight for human rights and democracy, what am I doing about it? And that's where my political angst started to begin, going back to my inventory being in recovery with 12 steps. I took inventory. It's like, what am I doing to help fight? And, people die fighting for justice. So being an atheist, what I say now is this line: justice bless America.
Which I love. And that's what this is all about. Because the core of the initiative, based on the work that you've discovered and then you've been very much supportive of, and getting out there in all the best ways you can, I hope becomes indicative of millions of people, because we have the answers that can take this whole corruption down. And what I've always said is corruption bursts and fuels fascism. And if anybody doesn't know, we're actually an authoritarian state right now with all sorts of fascist leanings. You're out of your mind. I think millions of us already recognize that and where it's going. For me, just like any system, it has to function with integrity. And obviously, that, you know, is more important in governments, particularly as it relates to the law. So you can't have two separate lines of the law. You can't have the law for everybody below the line and then no law for those above the line. And so when you had prefaced Eric Holder, what people don't seem to understand, and it's incredible how this whole thing works through obfuscation and media and all sorts of psychology, and really, you know what you know. And a lot of this stuff is complicated. But Obama's attorney general enabled and allowed Wall Street to get away with the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history. Now you got to understand, like I said at the beginning, I'm an entrepreneur. Okay. So that means I'm a capitalist. Okay. What that means is I got to go to people, I got to find people to invest in projects to get them done. I manage it. Hopefully you go through the whole process. And on the other end, after you cross your T's, dot your I's, you go through all the tax aspects, which takes a lot of information, which you have to have a large knowledge base, not just the ability to bring good projects to the market, but it requires so much. And that's what producers do. Just like developers, if you're going to develop a hotel or a casino, in the case of Donald Trump, who knew nothing about this, he just inherited a lot of money and let his money work with others, but then he got involved with the underworld. But the bottom line is that if the law isn't equally applied, then you don't have a law. You have a mirage, you have a facade, you have, something that is just a myth. And so, for example, I'll ask you, Troy, can a building stand if it doesn't have integrity?
Of course not. I mean, I
it's
may
a
be
stupid question. It's a stupid
I
question,
may
right?
I may be an atheist, but I do know my Bible. You don't build it, on sand, right?
Right, right. Or a plane can't fly, a ship can't float, car doesn't run. If it's sabotaged, we all know that. We're not idiots. But the thing is, not everybody knows everything because it's just to understand how the situation is that we're in. Honestly, you have to understand macroeconomics, microeconomics. You have to understand the law, geopolitics, finance. You have to understand, you know, a whole constellation of information to fully gestate how things work. Why? Because when you're an investigative journalist, you have to get the details. You have to know who did what, when, and how. You have to get the facts. And when you get the facts and you understand how things work, or in the case of what we call a black box, you know that when a plane flies, we look for the black box because the black box tells us what happens, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I am in context to the collapsing country we once called America. It's because the law has collapsed because of corruption. We all know that if you build a house on sand, or if, let's say, your house is infiltrated with termites, the foundation's going to fall. I could go on and on and on with more revelations than than are necessary. But what we've done in the con, which leads to this behind me and what you've been involved with, and no, you don't have to have all the answers, which is beautiful, Troy. You do feel it though, and you have felt that I have something that you can trust, which is extraordinarily important because otherwise it's just a bunch of noise. And the question is, who can we trust right now? Who can we trust? Can we trust mainstream media? You've already answered that question, but I'll ask you again. Can you trust mainstream media?
Well, to a certain point, but no, not really. It's I'm getting more from like Midas Touch, for instance.
Fair enough.
It,
Fair enough. And
yeah,
Midas
yeah,
Midas Touch has its vulnerabilities too, because Midas Touch is connected to the DNC, and the
right.
DNC
And
will want you to know certain things and not everything. But
right. No, I get. Can I just uh,
sure,
follow
absolutely.
up just a little bit? My gut, I like to think that I'm intelligent enough, being drenched in reality, right?
Right.
That I can see when they're leaning left. Like I mentioned, Lawrence and Rachel, right? They omit stuff. I know when they do it, and I hate it when they do it, right? So anyway, I feel it out, but in a blanket statement about can I trust mainstream media? Uh, Not 100%.
Okay. Let me just pick up on that. Being a producer, having been in the mix of this my whole life, and having been somebody who used to really appreciate and probably this is a huge impetus and inspiration to who I became. When I was young, we only had three major networks, and of course, we had the
Right.
Walter Cronkite
Oh yeah,
sort of vertical, and you trusted Walter Cronkite, right? I mean, that was the
absolutely.
idea. There was a standard, and the standard bearers at that time were that journalism was the fourth estate and was not to be thrown under the bus of a profit motive because stories would elicit the truth and yada yada yada. Was it a perfect system? Not remotely. But did Edward Murrow and Walter Cronkite and some illuminate a specific degree of trust that we all felt like the adults were in charge and we could deal with situations? That's what I grew up with. What we have 40 years later is we have a scenario where everything I just mentioned we threw out the baby with the bathwater. The profit motive overran truth, but then that got tied into a much more expansive world of corruption. And there's a way the financialized world works within the conduct of corruption. And so again, you have to understand law, geopolitics, media, history, how things work, and all of these other things, which not a lot of people have the time for because why? They're living in the reality, right, of their existence. And I like to describe that as the four walls of our existence, right? Everybody's walking through their own journey. Everybody has their own specific things they deal with and their own construct. And not everybody has the ability just to simply plug into a computer and download tens of thousands of hours of information and have the wherewithal to be able to unpack that in a usable way. That's why what we've done cuts to the chase if you're able to understand the blueprint of how it works, which is the con, quite frankly, which we've provided for free because all the American people buy our lies, honestly. But the Clean New Deal is the story that emancipates us from the bondage of lies. Would you accept that the Trump administration facilitates an ocean of madness and lies?
Of course, but I want to say one thing here. I What is the actions that can be taken with the Clean New Deal? That's really what I want to cut the chase
Okay.
to
Okay.
with what I need to understand. What are you going to do legally and all that? And do you even have the recourse, uh, especially with what's going on in the courts right now with all this other stuff? That's stuff I follow too. You
Yes
know,
and yes, yes and yes, but the time is fleeting. So let me answer this because I do have
right,
to
yeah,
jump
go,
to
yeah,
another thing.
please do,
But
please.
I do want to see this is a great exercise, and I want to see how you respond to this. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what the four questions are that lead into what we call the precepts of the Clean New Deal. But to understand what they all mean, you really have to put together the Rubik's Cube of what the big problems are. Okay. So the first question I'll ask you is, do you know what qualified immunity is?
I I do not have a definition for it, so enlighten me a little bit more. I think I know.
Sure, sure. The police can shoot with impunity. The police can shoot to kill. So we've solved through like the Black Lives Matter scenario, for example, a lot of unarmed youth, black males typically, and of course there was a handful of other examples of women and so on and so forth that got shot by overzealous police in a situation where they were unarmed or not guilty of a crime and were murdered on the spot.
Got it.
What happened in the aftermath were the cops were never held accountable. The only
Right.
cops that I know of that were held accountable were, of course, the guys in Minneapolis, based on the boy, I can't even think of his name right now. That spawned, and I can see his
Chauvin,
face. Yeah,
Chauvin.
yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so but qualified immunity is kind of an insurance sort of game that cities and counties and states and governments and yada yada play so that the cities don't go bankrupt defending an overzealous police. And so what they've given is qualified immunity to the police who can shoot to kill. Now, does that make sense in a country where obviously, let's say the most extreme example of a felony is capital murder, is it not?
Yes.
Okay, so does anybody that you're aware of above capital murder?
That I am aware of that is above it. Uh, uh, what happened at Kent State? I don't know. I'm starting to
There you
think.
go. No, 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 no.
Yeah.
You're right because it's qualified immunity, and
Right.
qualified immunity came long after Kent State. But if the cops can kill with impunity, okay, what exactly is that? I'll ponder that question there for a minute, right? So then, what is judicial immunity? I don't have to go through the whole thing because you can obviously, insert. Well, are judges above the law? Look at
Right.
what's going on with our corrupt Supreme Court. Yeah, they're
Or
above the law.
Clarence Thomas getting all that money from. Yeah.
Right. They're above the law. So
Right.
wait a second. What was the big to do during the run up in 2024 with the Supreme Court as it related to the question of the imperial president, that Donald Trump would be immune as the president? That's called presidential immunity, is it not?
Right. Yes.
Okay. So now pack that away. Those three questions first, right? So if the president's above the law, if the courts are above the law, and police are above the law, would you say that's your understanding of democracy, where everybody
No,
is
of
equal?
course not. Of course not.
Okay, it's kind of a silly question, is it not?
Yeah, of course.
Okay,
Yeah. Mhm.
so pack that away. So in a democracy, and this is the fourth question of the what I call the four questions. What I don't want to go through a whole learning lesson here to see what you know about the Electoral College. I'm just going to ask you this straight up. What's your understanding of democracy by way of one person, one vote?
Well, that's the way it should be, and the Electoral College should be thrown out.
Okay, so you know enough about it, and I don't have to
Oh,
go into
yeah.
that. Okay,
Right.
because and for the viewers out there that are listening to this, just a real caveat to that, quick caveat that I think everybody can relate to, and I always use this as a metaphor. But the state of Wyoming, with maybe 700,000 residents, has an exorbitant amount of billionaires because of tax policy and Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and Teton. county, they can all park their capital there, and there's no taxing and taxes, and they all conglomerate there anyway because that's what billionaires do. They like to live near each other because they like to know what the other guy's doing, right? But they literally have as much legislative influence as does the state of California with 50 million residents. Does that make sense?
No, it does not. And I'm going to go, I'll tell you a little bit more understanding. Um, is that why does North Dakota and South Dakota have four senators?
Well, wait, two per, yeah, as opposed to California with two
Right, as
senators. Yeah,
opposed to
exactly.
California, because
Exactly.
of population. So your talk about the electoral college, it doesn't work as far as the popular vote. Yeah,
So,
no,
so, so what is it? What is your definition of democracy? What is the exact? You don't have to give me the exact definition, but what is your intuition, interpretation of what you think democracy is supposed to be?
well, it's on a very famous document, We the People.
But everybody's equal, right?
Right,
But we
everybody's equal.
but we
Right.
know that's absolutely ridiculous. And I'll just check off the boxes. If the cops are above the law, if the judges are above the law, and the president is above the law, and that you can manipulate the electoral college such that the minority is the ones who can be in control. Do you have a word that you might actually say, oh, wait, we're not a democracy, we're actually something else? Do you think you might be able to fill in that blank?
What other than being well, oligarchy comes to mind.
That's
That,
exactly right. That's
yeah, I
exactly
thought
right.
so. Okay.
Which is also, by the way, a shortcut to tyranny. Okay.
Of course.
What was the American Revolution against?
Tyranny.
Okay. So I'm glad you're laughing because that's when people discover it's like the light bulb goes off. And that's how you get into the precepts of the Clean New Deal, which is to reboot that which we're supposed to be in order to form a more perfect union because we all know nobody's perfect. But this is out of control, what we're in the midst of. It's insanity. And it all emanates from the money and corruption, which leads into the first precept of the Clean New Deal, which is we got to create a new Glass-Steagall Act. Now, let me ask you one
Right.
question. Do you know what Glass-Steagall is?
Yeah, I do. And I've known a little bit about it even before I viewed your documentary. But it was basically put in place after the stock market crash of 29 in order to, I don't know how to describe
You're,
it,
you're
but
totally on you're totally on point, and I'm very impressed with your retention there. Glass-Steagall, there were two senators, Carter Glass and Steagall, that they got inside because of the investigation that took place after the Great Depression to understand what caused the Great Depression. And so they came up with legislation because we came up with what was known as the Federal Reserve, not too far in advance of that. But they realized that you have to have aligned interest. You can't gamble with other people's money. What caused the Great Depression was over leverage. Now there was a lot of different elements to it, but it was that the banks were using deposits to gamble on all sorts of derivative products that they were gambling with, and they were, fraudulently, creating all sorts of outcomes that would ultimately create runs, but they didn't have the deposits to pay everybody when people were lining up for their deposits, which then collapsed the economy. So, in the aftermath of that, the investigation led to all of the causality of what created the Great Depression. And the Glass-Steagall Act came out that basically uh, separated investment banking from commercial banking. So, do you know why? Or I should ask you this, just out of curiosity, what is your definition of capitalism?
well, uh, produce goods to sell to consumers. Uh, and by producing those goods, you create jobs so the consumers have money to buy those goods. Would be the basis of it, but it gets a little bit above my pay grade, Patrick,
Sure,
of my
understood, understood,
education. Yeah, so I couldn't
understood.
really.
Let me just
Yeah.
tell you what the notion of capitalism is freedom, liberty, the idea that anybody can do whatever they want to within the economy. Okay,
Okay.
that's kind of the notion. But capitalism, the actual definition is it's a the means of production and distribution for owners for profit. Okay, so owners can create like a producer can create a vertical like a production for profit. That's the idea. Why do you get investors? They invest in a movie that's going to make money, right? You make the movie for $20 million, it makes $150 million. There's profit. Okay. Same with Apple, same with Exxon, same with any company in the history of the world, right? That's the idea. Now, the
Right.
key consideration of capitalism, however, is that, and this is what I think most people think of when we think of capitalism, but isn't the beauty of the free market within the United States, given our history and everything else, is that the winners prevail, supposedly, because they saw a need, felt a need, did some magnificent innovation in whatever category it is. And we could throw rock and roll in there, for example. Did you and I want to buy it? And I'm not going to, go through the whole litany of what our favorite music is. But back in the day, did I want to buy Kiss albums when I was growing up? Did I want to buy Led Zeppelin? Yeah, I did. I wanted to own those records. Were
Uh-huh.
they influential in my life? Oh yeah. Somebody created that music. Somebody created the record label. Somebody created the actual record and distributed that product to market, of which I bought. And then the more that we bought, the more that we showed our sort of support for that particular business, the more it grows. And so we might end up with 40 years of Led Zeppelin, or we might end up with things that aren't so good that we could go on and laugh about, right? But
Right.
the idea is that it creates innovation, right? But the beauty of it's supposed to be is risk reward, which means if you're going to, and it sounded like, a little thing about casinos, if you're going to, sit at the table, for example, and you're wagering because of your different knowledge of what's happening in whatever game you're playing, isn't it your responsibility to know what you're betting and why, and to be able to hedge how much money you're going to place on that bet, for example? Isn't it
Of
your
course.
responsibility?
It is. It is,
Oh,
even if you're
okay,
drunk from them giving you free drinks.
exactly. So, have you ever been at the table out of your mind making stupid decisions, fall down drunk, maybe back in your old days on more elements? Would you ever expect, for example, after making bad bet after bad bet after bad bet, that the casino was not only going to return all the money you lost, but they were going to give you 10x?
Yeah. Right. No, yeah, they're not.
That that would be absolutely antithetical to, what did you call it? Dripping with reality.
Drenched in reality.
Okay, that would be antithetical to drenched in reality, would it not?
Right. Right. Well, you get drenched by it being drip. Yes, absolutely. No, I get it. I get what you're
Okay,
saying.
okay. So you get it. Now you got to understand that the biggest financial companies in our country, you mentioned Jamie Dimon. He's the
Yeah.
CEO of JP Morgan Chase.
Yes.
They just happened to be on the front page this week because
Yep.
it was finally revealed by a guy I interact with. These are the kinds of people I interact with. David Enrich, who is the business editor of the New York Times, who wrote that article with two other contributors, that finally, after 20 plus years, revealed JP Morgan Chase's role, at least asking the important questions with Epstein. Now pack that away.
Absolutely.
Now
Yeah.
pack that away for a second. So, what did we do after the great financial crisis? Do you know?
Yeah. We Jamie Dimon and JP Morgan well, we got bailed out.
We got bailed out. Okay.
Right.
We gave tens of trillions,
Right.
not billions, trillions. For the viewers out there, there's 1,000 billion and a trillion. The richest guy in the world right now is actually the new owner of CBS. My God, his name eludes me. The guy from
Larry Ellison,
Larry Ellison. Yeah, he's
who
now richer
owns
than.
the who
Yeah,
owns the entire island of Lanai.
right. Okay, there you go. Now he is yeah, West Coast folks know who he is, especially out of the Bay Area. He's been around
Yeah.
forever. Oracle, right? And that wonderful
Yep.
sailing vessel that they have in the US sailing and all that kind of thing. But
Uh-huh.
yeah, but he's absolutely exorbitantly rich now and everything else. But the point being that in the aftermath of the great financial crisis, oh, I was using that to make a, so Elon Musk is worth roughly, and Larry Ellison, about $400 billion now. There's a
Right.
thousand billion in a trillion, 1,000 billion in a trillion. Do you know, based on my posts, do you know how much I'm holding in terms of what I'm sitting on top of? Can you put a value on what it is that I promote all the time?
Oh, it's priceless.
I've got the $71 trillion revelation.
Oh,
Okay.
that's right. Okay, yeah, I
So I
remember
don't,
that. Okay.
I don't want to manifest all the ways that that happens just yet, but I'm going to go back to precept one of Glass-Steagall. Okay. So we've just established that in capitalism and in the United States, it's antithetical to give the losers massive upside. But that's exactly what we did. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think that would have been done legally?
No,
Okay. How many people know that what we've done to give tens of trillions of dollars illegally to the richest people on the planet, again, was illegal? How many people do you know that think know that?
not a whole lot. And let me interject here, Patrick. Um, I see where you're going here. You need to have the populace understand this because it's only the people who are going to be able to change it.
This is why you
So,
and I are talking, and this is why you're
right,
sharing, and this is what
right.
because he has anything that I've said so far been complicated, or is it pretty easy to comprehend once you take it in
Well,
small bits?
it's pretty easy to comprehend for me, but I got to tell you, man, there are a lot of dumb people out there.
Well,
And
sure, of course, but we don't need 340 million people to turn the table on this. We need about
that's
three and a half. We need about three
that's
and a half million, and I promise you, there's a lot more smart people in the United States than 3.5 million. But
right.
they just don't know the information. Go
Let
ahead.
me interject again, since I follow you on Blue Sky and I study. So it's a very small percentage of the populace that we need in order to flip it. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely, but they got to know who did what, when, and how, and the causality, and they have to hear
Got
what we're
it.
saying. Okay, because you asked, "What can I do? What's the solution?" We're on one. Okay, after the four questions, that just to remind you of where we're in the conversation. Qualified immunity is a problem. Presidential immunity is a problem. Judicial immunity is a problem. The electoral college is a problem because they're all perversions of democracy. They're just a myth. They're games. They're a flip approach. They're setting you up in a rape and pillage circus that you're not aware of, first and foremost. And I mean that as Americans writ large, even though intuitively you know it with dripping with reality, looking at homeless people on the streets. You're seeing the consequence of it, okay? And you can think to your head, well, maybe they bet too much on at the table and gambled, and then they dropped off and they never recovered. Well, again, I'm telling for the people who think of those analogies that if they did, the analogy would be, well, we'd give them more money than God so that there was never any consequence. What just let me ask you this quick question. If somebody was, because you come from a background where you had to go through years and years of discipline and coming through addiction and so on and so forth, what would happen earlier in your life or to anybody that you know like this if they're addicted to crack or alcohol or any drugs and you gave them unlimited drugs? What would happen?
Oh, they die.
They'd keep going or they'd die, right?
Yeah, they keep going. Yeah, they keep using or they would die. Yeah. Mhm.
They, or maybe more appropriately, they keep going until they die, which is what I
Yeah.
think we're in the midst of with these billionaires who've gotten trillions of dollars with this crack cocaine and free money that nobody knows about. Okay, so the way you end that is that it all happened because in 2009 we gave 33 trillion illegally to the collapsing housing market, which were all of the banks through the largest racketeering enterprise in history, and we never held them accountable. We gave them tens of trillions of dollars. What's going to happen if you give a crack addict tens of trillions of kilos of crack? He's going to fucking die, or he's going to go nuts until anything around him gets destroyed. So I don't, you know that. Okay, so that's Glass-Steagall is the ability to make that an impossibility. But what America needs to understand is that we literally have in those statutes, you might think to yourself, Patrick, are you nuts? There's no way in hell anybody would do that. I promise you, that's exactly what we did. And it says it in the statutes of Federal Reserve Act 13.3 that you can't use the full lending capacity, which we called exigent lending circumstances, of the fiat currency of the United States because we're the global reserve currency. You cannot use that to float capital markets in speculation, particularly as it relates to commodities and real estate. What was the 2008 great financial crisis? Everything I just said. What we did was nobody in media knew what the fuck was going on. Nobody knew how the system functions to be able to stop the bad guys from creating the situation. And I can assure you there's a lot more from doing what they did because it was all an illusion where everybody's buying houses, flipping houses, doing this and that, and the whole roulette circus of the whole thing until it came crashing down. Everybody was like, "Oh, this is how it's supposed to work, so I'm going to play the game." Right? In your world, what happens if someone's getting set up at the table? If someone's counting cards and I mean, what happens if someone's lying, stealing, and deceiving? Are there going to be victims at that table?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, well, that's what we did to tens of millions of people. So
Yes,
the first precept, while giving tens of trillions of dollars to the bad guys that did it, that set everybody up. It's an inside job. What we did, so you have a new Glass-Steagall, and the second portion of it is you create a new. What? Sorry, you've heard this from Bernie Sanders. I'm going to let you tap in on this. We got to get rid of Citizens United. What do you know about Citizens
yeah,
United?
yeah. Citizens United allows corporations to act quote unquote as people so that they could make donations to political entities like it was just you and me, and also they could be anonymous.
That's the most important part. They're anonymous and it's in the shadows. And so let me ask you a question based on your years and years of experience and drenched with reality. I mean, you could kind of say some good things happen in the darkness, but does a lot of bad happen in the darkness?
Of course, I
Okay.
I agree with you. Yes.
Okay. So you have a new Glass-Steagall, you get rid of Citizens United. They're both part and parcel to the same story. The next four precepts is that we've got to end qualified immunity and the presidential immunity and the judicial immunity and the electoral college. So based on the first six items that I've mentioned, do all of those sound rational to you?
Getting rid of them, absolutely.
That's in the Clean New Deal. Okay.
Uh,
Now the next portion is
You
just hold
muted.
on. Yeah, hold on one second.
Okay.
So does any of that not make sense to you? It all makes complete sense, right?
Yeah, it makes complete sense and sounds like a solution. And like I said earlier, I see where you're going. It needs this percentage of the populace to get engaged in order to flip all this by getting rid of these points that you bring up.
I think millions of people, tens of millions of people, have been living with this reality that you described as drenched in reality, and they just don't understand what direction is up because nobody's ever told them what's up. That's what I'm showing you after the millions of dollars and the thousands of hours that we put accumulating this together, that you trusted because you had instinct, and now we're in the final throes of this whole thing. So the next aspect of what the Clean New Deal proffers is, remember I mentioned to you that $71 trillion dollars had been looted by billionaires for the last 14 years?
Yes,
So where are we going to find the money to recreate our energy paradigm and the jobs that could create a new middle class?
I have no clue.
The way they stole it. We're just going to take it back, not from the guys who
Ooh,
stole it, because there's just the way this whole thing works. Trust me, money's not the issue. It's who's controlling the money and how. Because the Federal Reserve had backdoored $71 trillion dollars illegally. That's a starting point. We could recreate our energy paradigm and everything that goes with it, which would be kind of a modern day. When you think of the New Deal back after the Great Depression, that would end up doing things like build the Hoover Dam and the Golden Gate Bridge, and after World War II, the highway infrastructure project. Those things created massive growth in the economy, did it not?
it did.
So that's what we have to do again. We have to reboot the entire economy because the fossil fuel juggernaut that is really the baseline of this whole thing, which when Donald Trump says make America great again, the economy he's talking about, and everybody who understands what's happening in the world of energy understands this. 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump got rid of $689 billion dollars that had been earmarked for wind energy. They attacked the electric car manufacturing plant in Korea that was electric battery. He's got a full scale war on renewable energy because all of his money comes from backdoor and everything else, the Middle East, Saudi, UAE, all of the guys in the oil fossil fuel industry. And I could go on from there. So is there a way to reboot the United States economy? Yeah, by getting rid of pollution, of corruption to create the renaissance of possibility. That's what that is in the Clean New Deal. That's the entire composite of the Clean New Deal. Get rid of corruption, create a renaissance of possibility. But there's two other elements that have to go with this, or three, I should say. We've got to add 13 members to the Supreme Court because we've got to drown out this Roberts Court. And then we've got to be able to stop insider trading within Congress with all of our representatives basically front running on behalf of, you know, either companies or infrastructure projects that these guys are approving. You can't have politicians getting rich at the expense of the American people. And then I think we have to have term limits. So that's the entirety of the Clean New Deal. And I sped it up because I got to get going here pretty quick. But what's your reaction to all of that?
Uh, I agree, and I see that just getting the message out right now and getting people motivated is going to be the only chance in hell that we've got.
Not only we've got to save our democracy, but to save the freaking world. I kid you not. Doesn't it
Yes.
feel like we're on the edge of something calamitous, like the whole thing is going to completely collapse?
You know, Patrick, I got to tell you, I tell a lot of people that I'm glad I'm in my last half of my life. And I also am glad I never had children. I hate to say that, but for people that who have their kids and everything, I still see people having children today, and I like scratch my head and go, why? Because it looks bleak. It's going to take some time, but I'm just glad I'm in the last half of my life because you're right. The world, it's global. It's not just us.
Look, the sand is running out of the hourglass, and I mean, I have so many different songs that come to mind that personify this whole thing. A lot of the times, I think of Metallica. I think of what was the boy? It's just right on the tip of my tongue, man. It's just kind of from whom the bell tolls. That's what's blasting through my mind when I think
Mhm.
about the insanity, starting with Charlie Kirk, what's going on in the last 3 days, all of the mishigas of what's going to happen between a potentially polarized country that's all battling each other over cultural issues while the corruption puppeteers everybody. That's what
I
we reveal. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, as we're getting towards the end here, I just wanted to let you know I used to open my karaoke show at times with War Pigs.
Right. And Ozzy got it right. And by the way, I will recommend to anybody who's an Ozzy fan out there, boy, some of his best, most prolific work was his last, because I'm pretty sure he knew he was going to die and everything that went with it this summer with Back to the Beginning. But there's a song he did called The Almighty Dollar. Listen
Yeah,
to it when you get a chance
I
because it
have.
really good. It encapsulates a lot of what I'm talking about. Look, I'm going to close this up because we've got to run, and I want to encourage you to join me every time, Troy, on any of these that we do with other folks as well to help educating, adding your influence into what we are. But the most important thing that I heard from you is that you're drenched in reality, and you see it right in front of your face, but you have the and it's beautiful. You have the wherewithal and the inspiration that you've learned from, of course, your 12-step program. What am I doing? What can I do? What's the best thing I can do? Where do I get meaning? My question to you is: do you get meaning from what it is that I just laid out?
Oh, absolutely. And how could I further be of service to humanity?
Brilliant. If we want humanity to survive, where it's not under the thumb of some sort of fascist, corrupt empire, this is the only way through it. What I always say is if you, me, and everyone you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in decency and liberty and dignity and sustainability and beauty and all of the other aspects that make life worth living, if we come together in unity to profess the Clean New Deal, we will purge the misery of tyranny and create the renaissance of possibility. But what we need are people out there to become literally the vectors of the Big Bang of truth, which is what this is.
Excellent. I look forward to helping you in spreading the message, my friend.
You're a wonderful guy, Troy. All the best to you and everybody you interact with. Please reach out to me anytime you have questions. People, please check out the con at thecon.tv. Please check out thecleannewdeal.org. And I'll thank you again, Troy, for your time. Have a wonderful weekend and we'll talk soon, okay?
We will. Thank you, Patrick. Take care.